said, the one that makes me laugh, he said, and threw his arms around my neck. Show me how you do it, and I promise that I'll run away with you. I'll run away with you. Spinning on that dizzy edge, I kissed his face and I kissed his head, and dreamed of all the different ways I had to make him glow. Why are you so far away? He said, why won't you ever know that I'm in love with you? That I'm in love with you. You, soft and only you, lost and lonely you, strange as angels, dancing in the deepest oceans, twisting in the water. You're just like a dream. You're just like a dream. Daylight lit me into shape. I must have been asleep for days, and moving lips to breathe his name.
Nicholas Roerich was the consummate Renaissance man. He was not only a world-renowned artist, but an archaeologist, author, scholar, lecturer, diplomat, set and costume designer, poet, mystic, and explorer. But whatever Roerich's pursuit, it was always a quest for truth. In the introduction to Roerich's travel diary, Altai Himalaya, architect Claude Bragdon writes, "In everything Roerich does, he is seeking the hidden truth, the unrevealed beauty, the lost word. Like some mighty indefatigable hunter, armed not with a gun but with his pen and brushes, he stalks his quarry across oceans, rivers, mountains, though knowing all the while that the thing he is seeking is in himself." Both in his writing and in his painting, he permits us to participate in this adventure and thus draw nearer to that truth which is beauty, and that beauty which is truth. Let's follow the trail of Nicholas Roerich's life and his remarkable achievements. Nicholas Konstantinovich Roerich was born in Saint Petersburg on October 9, 1874. The name Nicholas means one who overcomes, and Roerich means rich in glory. Nicholas was the firstborn son of Konstantin and Maria Roerich. His father was a prominent attorney and notary. Nicholas spent much of his youth at the family's large country estate, Ishvara, located about 55 miles southwest of St. Petersburg. There, in the beauty of northern Russia, a lifelong love for nature was kindled in the young boy. At Ishvara, he developed a passion for hunting and an avid interest in natural history, archaeology, and the history of Russia. He was fond of music and horseback riding. As a teenager, he wrote adventure stories about hunting, some of which were published by hunting magazines. He also wrote poems, stories, and plays on themes from Russian history. A friend of his father, who was an artist, recognized his artistic talent and gave him his first art lessons. In 1893, when it came time for him to attend the university, his father wanted him to study law, but he wanted to pursue art. The young man resolved the situation by taking on the challenge of studying both. Perhaps the most important influence on Roerich during these years was his art teacher, Arhip Quinji. Roerich once said, "The eminent master, Quinji, was not only a remarkable artist, but also a great teacher of life. Roerich described his teacher as a real guru for his pupils in the high Hindu conception. Queenji would teach his students, there must be inwardness in a painting. Composition and technique must be subordinate to this inwardness. Nothing should distract the viewer from the main idea. Do not fill in empty spaces on the canvas with details that have no relation to the subject. That sounds like an analogy for life. Do not fill in the empty spaces on the canvas of your life with details that have no relation to the subject, the goal of your life. In the closing months of his schooling at the Academy of Arts, Nicholas planned a series of 12 paintings on the founding of the Russian nation. The first of these was the painting he submitted as his graduation project, entitled The Messenger, Tribe Has Risen Against Tribe. Author Jacqueline Dechter describes this painting in her book, Nicholas Roerich, The Life and Art of a Russian Master. She says, it depicts an old messenger sitting in a wooden boat. His stooped back and lowered arms convey sadness and concern. He is bearing news to a neighboring settlement that the tribes are at war. It is night and all is quiet. The young moon illuminates the white shirts of the messenger and the oarsman who is standing as he rows up the river. In the distance, the outline of a Slavic settlement nestled in the hills is barely visible in the darkness. The mood of anxiety and mysteriousness suffuses the painting. The messenger was lauded by both art critics and collectors and was purchased by a renowned patron of the arts for his private collection in Moscow. After this prestigious recognition, Roerich's work attracted the attention of the art world. Roerich had occasion to show his painting of the messenger to Leo Tolstoy. Tolstoy liked it and derived a parable from it. His comment was, "Have you ever crossed a rapidly flowing river in a boat? It is always necessary to steer higher than the spot toward which you are headed. Otherwise you will be taken downstream. So too, in the sphere of moral demands, it is always necessary to steer higher. Life takes everything downstream. Let your messenger hold the helm high, then he'll reach his destination." End of quote by Tolstoy. In 1898, with his formal education concluded, Roerich became assistant director of the Museum of the Society for the Encouragement of the Arts. In September 1900, he went to Paris to study art. We can glimpse the character of the young artist from answers he gave in a survey taken in May 1900. The 25-year-old Roerich stated that his favorite qualities in a man were talent and a defined goal. His favorite motto was, "Forward without looking back." And his favorite virtue was indefatigability. In the summer of 1901, Roerich returned to Saint Petersburg. In October, he married Helena. She was an accomplished pianist and came to be regarded as a distinguished lady of letters and a prolific writer in the esoteric tradition of Eastern religion. She was an inspiration and support to Nicholas throughout his life. Nicholas and Helena had 2 sons, George and Svetoslav. In 1901, Nicholas won a prestigious appointment as secretary of the Society for the Encouragement of the Arts. He proved to be a good administrator. In the early 1900s, the Roerichs traveled extensively throughout Russia and Europe. During these journeys, Professor Roerich painted, undertook archaeological excavations, studied architecture, lectured, and wrote about art and archaeology. In 1906, he was promoted to director of the School of the Society for the Encouragement of the Arts. In 1907, he began applying his talents to stage and costume design. This became a fulfilling and successful career for Roerich. He designed sets and costumes for Diaghilev's ballet and opera productions, and for almost all of Wagner's and many of Rimsky-Korsakov's operas. At the invitation of the director of the Chicago Art Institute, Roerich came to the United States in 1920. He traveled widely, exhibited his works, and lectured at exclusive girls' schools. He even lectured at Marshall Field's department store in Chicago. For me, that brings him right down to earth with Godfrey and Lotus in Marshall Fields in Chicago. There he taught on the spiritual garment and harmonizing the human aura with clothing. While in the United States, Roerich founded the Master Institute of United Arts and an international society of artists called Cœur Ardens, which means flaming heart. It's Cœur Ardens, flaming heart. He also founded an international art center in New York called Corona Mundi, which means crown of the world. As a tribute to Roerich, the Roerich Museum was established in New York in 1923. Many of the artist's works are magnificent scenes of nature, and his themes are inspired by history, architecture, and religion. His paintings are mystical, allegorical, and even prophetic. For instance, between 1912 and 1914, on the eve of World War I, Roerich's paintings often reflected a sense of impending cataclysm. In 1936, just before World War II, he named one of his paintings Armageddon. In it, one can see the rooftops of a city visible through clouds of smoke, with the silhouettes of soldiers marching in the foreground across the bottom of the picture. Roerich was influenced by many artists and a variety of schools of art, but his was a school of his own making. American poet Mary Segrist writes, "Roerich's pictures are painted in flame." I'm sure you are noting as I read this that this is a man making his ascension step by step. And what he perceives as real is the flame itself, the fire itself, the essence of oneself. He follows no school or tradition, having in a sense absorbed and assimilated all cultures and gone on in paths of his own and in ways that his own genius directs. The beauty of his art is that method has become in large measure subordinate to or one with the spiritual content of the whole. The iridescence, the radiance of his canvases is rather the product of spiritual awareness than of outward method. No man, woman, or child can stand before these paintings without getting back sounds of the infinite sea. To each one who listens with the inner ear, sees with the inner eye, they bring back some tidal wave of beauty. End of quote by Mary Segrist. Critic Ivana Rodny writes of Roerich's work, "From the first glance, his paintings impress an onlooker as if they were replicas from the interiors of some unknown cosmic temples." Nicholas Roerich was greatly influenced by Eastern culture. He had desired for a long time to travel to the East to study its culture firsthand. In 1923, he set sail for India. He resided for a time in Sikkim, then a kingdom bordering northeast India. There he made final plans for an expedition to Central Asia. In Sikkim, Roerich painted a series called His Country, inspired by the grandeur of the Himalayas. Roerich wrote of his enchantment with the mountains. All teachers journeyed to the mountains. The highest knowledge, the most inspired songs, the most superb sounds and colors are created on the mountains. On the highest mountains there is the Supreme. The high mountains stand as witnesses of the great reality. Francis R. Grant, secretary of the Roerich Museum, discussed some of the paintings from Roerich's His Country series in a 1927 issue of Art and Archaeology. It is not alone the colorful brilliance of Asia that speaks its arresting message from the paintings of the master artist, he wrote. There is the other side of Asia which has so deeply touched Professor Roerich as he traversed the passes of Asia's life, that of her spirit, the deeply meditative side of Asia, which has gestated for centuries like a lotus bud. The dreams of Asia live again in the panorama of his work. Both Nicholas and Helena Roerich had an intense interest in Eastern philosophy and religion. Nicholas portrayed 19 Eastern and Western spiritual teachers in his monumental Banners of the East series. He painted this series while he was in Sikkim between 1924 and 1925. On his way through the East, writes Francis Grant, he found the threads of all the great teachers of the world. In Kashmir, he discovered the beauty and light of the succeeding waves of civilization as they intertwined and united, inspiring him to paint the supreme monuments of each great spiritual leader. In the Banners of the East series, says Decter, Roerich does not always deify these holy figures, but portrays most of them in the time and place in which they lived, carrying out their spiritual tasks. In this respect, the Banners of the East series resembles Tibetan spiritual paintings, or tankas. In his book Altai Himalaya, Roerich wrote of the unifying thread that ran through the Banners of the East. He said, Sergius, builder of communities, forbade his co-workers to accept alms. Food and other articles might be accepted only in exchange for labor. Hungering himself, he offered his labor. The building up of communities and enlightenment alone preoccupied this remarkable man. His refusal of the office of metropolite and his refusal to wear precious metals appear in his life as natural acts without any pose. His life was one of indefatigable labor. He chose young, completely unknown co-workers. He preached simplicity, as above, so below. The refusal of personal property was not because of any command, but because of his realization of the harm of this idea. In the ranks of builders of communities, Sergius retains a great place. They are not so numerous, these builders of a life which responds in its inner meaning to the future evolution, and we should carefully record these names of future elimination, extending their lists until our day. Amid strife and in the manifestation of truth, upon the chariots of time ascend the lawgivers of human welfare. Moses, the untiring leader, Amos, the austere, Buddha, lion conqueror, Confucius, justice of life, Zoroaster, flaming poet of the sun, Plato, transfigured and reflected in his shadows, blessed Isa, Jesus, great in the immortal sacrifice, solitary Origen, the wise commentator, Sergius, great teacher and ascetic. All walked untiringly. All fell victim to the persecution of their day. All knew that the teachings of general well-being would inevitably come to pass. All knew that each sacrifice for the sake of the general well-being was but the approach of the way. End of quote by Nicholas Roerich. Roerich's Banners of the East series portrays not only spiritual leaders of the past, but the future leaders of the East, the coming Buddha Maitreya and the World Mother. Decter says that to Roerich the highest symbol of spiritual unity was the Mother of the World. She writes, the most universal of all great teachers, the very symbol of spiritual and cultural unity, is the Mother of the World. Roerich painted this subject many times throughout his career. As Roerich himself expressed it, to both East and West, the image of the Great Mother, womanhood is the bridge of ultimate unification. There is little doubt, says Decter, that his image of woman was inspired and influenced by Helena Roerich, who devoted much of her own writing to the destined role of women in the new era. Another recurrent theme in Roerich's spiritual and artistic work is the divine fire, or Agni, A-G-N-I, Agni, which he believed would illumine mankind in the approaching new era. He once wrote, "In the cults of Zoroaster there is represented the chalice with a flame. The same flaming chalice is engraved upon the ancient Hebrew silver shekels of the time of Solomon and of an even remoter antiquity. In the Hindu excavations we observe the same powerfully stylized image. Sergius of Radonega, laboring over the enlightenment of Russia, administered from the flaming chalice. Upon Tibetan images, the bodhisattvas are holding the chalice, blossoming with tongues of flame. One may also remember the Druid chalice of life. A flame, too, was the Holy Grail. It has long been since said, faith without deeds is dead. Buddha pronounced 3 paths, the long way of knowledge, the shorter way of faith, and the shortest way through action. David and Solomon also glorify the strivings of labor. The Vedanta extols the manifestation of works. Verily, in the foundation of all covenants, action is placed foremost. This is the creative fire of the Spirit. This is the creative fire of the Holy Spirit. Work for the labor of God with striving, with activity, with intensity. In 1924, Roerich started on his Central Asian expedition. Helena, his son George, and several other Europeans accompanied him on the expedition. Roerich later wrote of his goals. As an artist, my main aspiration in Asia was towards artistic work. In addition to its artistic aims, our expedition planned to study the position of the ancient monuments of Central Asia, to observe the present condition of religions and creeds, and to note the traces of the great migrations of the nations. Roerich's party traveled 15,500 miles through Central Asia in an arduous and often dangerous trek that took 5 years. Despite overwhelming obstacles, Roerich executed over 500 paintings during the journey. For much of the time, the Roerichs were out of touch with the West. After a long silence, a telegram reached New York on May 24, 1928. Its terse sentences impart a flavor of the journey. In part it read, "Roerich American expedition after many hardships has reached Himalayas. Thus ended big Central Asiatic expedition. Many artistic and scientific results. Already sent several series of paintings to New York. Hope last sending from Mongolia safely reached you. Many observations regarding Buddhism. Peaceful American flag encircled Central Asia. Everywhere warmly greeted except Khotan and Lhasa governments. On Tibetan territory have been attacked by armed robbers. Superiority of our firearms prevented bloodshed. In spite of Tibetan passports, expedition forcibly stopped by Tibetan authorities on October 6, 2 days north of Nagchu. With inhuman cruelty, expedition has been detained for 5 months at altitude of 15,000 feet in summer tents amidst severe cold, about 40 degrees below centigrade. Expedition suffered from want of fuel and fodder. During stay in Tibet, 5 men, Mongols, Baritas, and Tibetans died, and 90 caravan animals perished. By order of authorities, all letters and wires addressed to Lhasa government and Calcutta British authorities seized. Forbidden to speak to passing caravans, forbidden to buy foodstuffs from population. Money and medicines came to an end. The presence of 3 women in caravan and medical certificate about heart weakness not taken into consideration. With great difficulties on March 4, expedition started southward. All 9 European members of the expedition safe, courageously bore hardships of exceptionally severe winter. Greetings. End of telegram by Nicholas Roerich. Roerich's expedition brought other surprises. As he traveled throughout the East, Roerich uncovered something quite revolutionary to the Western mind, something that reinforced his belief in the unity of East and West. He discovered legends and manuscripts that said Jesus had journeyed to the East during his so-called lost years between the age of 12 and 30. As you know, the New Testament says nothing of Jesus' whereabouts from the time he appeared in the temple at age 12 until he began his mission in Palestine at about age 30. Roerich wrote of the legends of Jesus' journey to the East in his observations about Leh, Ladakh, a region bordering Tibet. He said, "In Leh, we again encountered the legend of Christ's visit to these parts. The Hindu postmaster of Leh and several Ladakhi Buddhists told us that in Leh, not far from the bazaar, there still exists a pond near which stood an old tree. Under this tree, Christ preached to the people before his departure back to Palestine." We also heard another legend of how Christ, when young, arrived in India with a merchant's caravan, and how he continued to study the higher wisdom in the Himalayas. We heard several versions of this legend, which has spread widely throughout Ladakh, Xinjiang, and Mongolia. But all versions agree on one point, that during the time of his absence, Christ was in India and Asia. In another place, Roerich wrote, "Leh is a remarkable sight. Here the legends connected the paths of Buddha and Christ. Buddha went through Leh northwards. Jesus communed here with the people on his way from Tibet. Secretly and cautiously, the legends are guarded. It is difficult to sound them because lamas, above all people, know how to keep silent. Only by means of a common language, and not merely that of tongue, but also of inner understanding, can one approach their significant mysteries. If behind the present idol of Buddha, it is difficult to perceive the lofty image of Buddha the teacher, then it is still more unexpected to hear in Tibetan mountains beautiful words about Jesus. Yet Buddhists preserve the teachings of Jesus, and lamas pay reverence to Jesus, who passed and taught here. Thus the legends of Asia weave such an image of Jesus, so ennobled and near to all nations. And Asia preserves in its mountains such legends. And it is not astonishing that the teachings of Jesus and Buddha are leading all nations into one family. But beautiful it is that the light-giving idea of unity is expressed so clearly. I wish our priests would think about Buddha in the same manner that the cultured lamas speak of Christ. Only in such a sympathetic understanding lies the guarantee of future growth. End of quote by Nicholas Roerich. In his writings, Roerich quotes 1,500-year-old manuscripts that describe Jesus' journey to the East and his experiences there. Roerich was not the first or the last to find evidence of Jesus' stay in the East. In 1887, Russian journalist Nicholas Notovich discovered Buddhist texts at the Himas monastery that recounted Jesus' journey through India, Nepal, Ladakh, Tibet, and Persia. In 1894, Notovich published a translation of these texts. In 1922, Swami Abhedananda visited Himas in search of the same manuscripts and later published a translation of them. In my book, The Lost Years of Jesus, I have published Notovich's, Abhedananda's, and Roerich's translations of the manuscripts they found, along with the story of our beloved Elizabeth Kaspari. Mother Kaspari has been with us, keeping the flame of Montessori and teaching for young children through the age of 7 with the Montessori method. In 1939, a Lama at Himis Monastery presented a set of parchments to Madame Kaspari with the words, "These books say your Jesus was here." In 1951, U.S. Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas traveled to Himis. He wrote, "There are those who to this day believe that Jesus visited the place, that he came here when he was 14, left when he was 28, heading west to be heard of no more." The legend fills in the details, saying that Jesus traveled to Himis under the name of Isa. In 1975, Dr. Robert Roerich, a cultural anthropologist, visited Himis. An eminent Ladakhi physician told him that some people believed there were documents at the monastery that said Jesus had been to Himis. And world traveler Edward Noack told us that in the late 1970s, while he was visiting Himis, a Lama informed him that a manuscript describing Jesus' pilgrimage to Ladakh was locked in the storeroom. It is fascinating to read the translations of the manuscripts about Jesus' sojourn in the East, now published side by side in the Lost Years of Jesus. Not only do they tell of Jesus' Eastern travels, but they speak of what he learned from Hindus and Buddhists, and what he taught the people of the East while he was there. They give us a new perspective on Jesus and a new perspective on our own spiritual quest. At the conclusion of their Central Asian expedition in 1928, the Roerichs permanently settled in the Kulu Valley in India. There they found the Urusvati Himalayan Research Institute. They founded this institute to study archaeology, linguistics, and botany. George Roerich was the head of the ethnological, linguistic, and archaeological departments. Svetoslav ran the departments of ancient Asian art and Tibetan and local pharmacopoeia, which dealt with botany. In 1934 and 1935, the United States Department of Agriculture sponsored another Roerich expedition to Asia. This one lasted 17 months. Its primary purpose was to find drought-resistant grasses to alleviate drought conditions in the United States. Roerich sent back to the United States 2,000 packets of seeds, researched medicinal herbs, conducted archaeological digs, and sketched. One of Roerich's lifelong pursuits was to preserve the world's cultural heritage. In 1929 and 1935, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to promote international peace through art and culture, and to protect art treasures in time of war. 1935 marked a high point in Roerich's career. That year, representatives of 20 Latin American countries and the United States signed the Roerich Pact Treaty at the White House. Under the pact, nations at war were obliged to respect museums, universities, cathedrals, libraries, just as they did hospitals. Just as hospitals flew the Red Cross flag, cultural institutions would fly Roerich's banner of peace. The banner was a flag that had a white field with 3 red spheres in the center, surrounded by a red circle. This symbol of 3 spheres is found in many cultures of the world. To Roerich, the 3 spheres represented the synthesis of all arts, sciences, and religions within the circle of culture. I have taken that symbol of the circle with the 3 dots, had it crafted in blue, and I recommend that all who are sincere and dedicated chelas, who would like to be pummeled by me, challenged, tutored, stripped, etc., wear the button, so that if those who do not want to have what I just named will not wear that button. So if I see a chela with 3 dots in a circle, then I know that they will appreciate anything I might tell them about themselves, their paths, or how they can accelerate. Roerich defined culture as the cultivation of the creative potential in man. He believed that by protecting culture, the spiritual health of the nations would be preserved. He said, "Where there is peace, there is culture. Where there is culture, there is peace." During World War II, Roerich devoted himself to helping victims of the war. He also donated money from the sale of his paintings and books to the Soviet Red Cross. In the summer of 1947, Roerich had heart surgery but was soon back at his easel. One of the last works Roerich painted is called The Master's Command. It depicts a white eagle flying toward a devotee who is meditating in a lotus posture atop a high cliff overlooking a mountain valley. I would suggest that he painted himself. On December 13, 1947, while Roerich was working on a variant of this painting, his heart suddenly failed and his soul took flight to its heavenly home. He was 73 years old. Throughout his life, Nicholas Roerich found the time to be involved in a multitude of activities and to do them all well. Vladimir Shibayev, secretary at the Urasvati Himalayan Research Institute for a decade, wrote that he never saw Roerich idle, inactive, scattered, or fussy. Svetoslav Roerich said that his father was kind and patient, never wasting even a moment of his time, perfectly balanced in stress and felicity, always helpful and always mindful of the welfare of his associates. Zina Fosdick, a longtime associate of the Roerichs, said of Nicholas, "His was the wisdom of both the earthly and supermundane planes, ever compassionate, alleviating heartaches of those who came to him. He never belittled, but only magnified, finding in ever so small a consciousness a seed of good." End of quote by Zina Fosdick. Of Roerich's profile career, Jacqueline Dechter writes, "Nicholas Roerich's legacy extends to 4 continents. It comprises some 7,000 paintings, drawings, and set and costume designs, nearly 30 books, countless articles and lectures, museums and societies throughout the world, and the Roerich Pact." Nicholas and Helena Roerich's spiritual life is not something that is often written about, but it was the wellspring from which their literary and artistic vision arose. In her biography of Roerich, Dechter says, "Eastern culture, philosophy, and religious teachings held an ever greater appeal for both Nicholas and Helena Roerich. The writings of Ramakrishna and his disciple Vivekananda left a deep and lasting impression on them. They were particularly interested in the idea that devotion to God was accomplished through activity useful to society, through every person's fulfillment of his duty and obligations, and that this devotion in turn facilitated the perfection of the individual. Ramakrishna preached the necessity of spiritual perfection, which could be attained through the enlightenment of individuals, by schooling man in goodness, justice, and altruism. It is likely that Roerich's paintings illustrating the good works of saints were inspired by these concepts. His written work of this period includes allusions to and quotes from Tagore, Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, and the Bhagavad Gita. In his diary for October 26, 1917, he wrote, "I bow to the ground, to the teachers of India. They have brought true creativity and spiritual joy and a fruitful silence into the chaos of our life. At a time of extreme need, they have sent us a call, a serene, earnest, wise call." End of quote. Dechter says that Theosophy, a spiritual doctrine developed by Helena P. Blavatsky in the 1870s, also appealed to the Roerichs. A Russian branch of the Theosophical Society was founded in 1908, and the Roerichs apparently joined it prior to World War I. Years later, Helena Roerich translated Blavatsky's monumental work, The Secret Doctrine, into Russian. Roerich was not an adherent of any one established religion or philosophical movement. His own deeply spiritual philosophy incorporated elements of Buddhism, Hinduism, pantheism, Theosophy, Russian Orthodoxy, and even the theory of relativity. He also embraced the ancient teachings of Agni Yoga, the yoga of fire, a yoga of action rather than asceticism. Agni Yoga teaches the path of cooperation with the spiritual evolution of the cosmos. This is the grandeur of his thinking. In 1920, the Roerichs formed the first groups devoted to the study of Agni Yoga. In an article about the character and work of his father, Svetoslav Roerich summed up the artist's quest for inner spirituality. He said, "He was a great patriot and he loved his motherland, yet he belonged to the entire world, and the whole world was his field of activity. Every race of men was to him a brotherly race, every country a place of special interest and of special significance. Every religion was a path to the ultimate, and to him life meant the great gates leading into the future. Every effort of his was directed towards the realization of the beautiful, and his thoughts found a masterful embodiment in his paintings, writings, and public life. No one has ever portrayed mountains like my father. From his canvases, the Himalayas radiate upon us all their unbelievable wealth of color, beauty, and the inexpressible majesty of the great concept for which the very word Himalayas stands. Truly he earned the name given to him, the Master of the Mountains. Through all his paintings and writings runs the continuous thread of a great message, the message of the teacher, calling to the disciples to awaken and strive towards a new life, a better life, a life of beauty and fulfillment." Following his passing in 1947, Nicholas Roerich became an ascended master. The ascended masters are spiritually enlightened beings who once lived on earth, fulfilled their reason for being, and reunited with God. In 1990, the ascended master Nicholas Roerich delivered a dictation through me. In that dictation, he passed on to us valuable lessons about the importance of concentrating on our personal mission in life. He reminded us that we each have a special mission to fulfill on earth before we can make our own ascension and attain union with God. He said, "Embrace the work that is yours." How often have I seen students on the path shrink from work, the work that is even theirs, that they must do and give to grow in such intensity of fire and fervor that they will one day be ignited and become one with God. Don't look for the easy job. Look for the difficult one. Sharpen the mind, the tools, the inner senses, the spiritual points of light, the chakras. Embrace the work that is yours. I'd like you to ponder throughout the rest of this day till you retire. Are you really embracing the work that is yours? Or do you just fulfill a job and take home a paycheck? If you have lost the hours in not performing that work, then go back to school and find the best teacher in your field. But work to perfect your art, your science, your calling. He said that we all have an inner calling and an outer calling. There are things that cannot be put aside in life, he said, for they burn from within. They burn from within. Can you speak about that burning within your own being and heart? On fire for God, on fire for union with Him. It's a wonderful concept. The question is, do you put aside even the burning from within? These burnings are our calling, and that calling must be secured. Everything must be sacrificed for it. The outer calling cannot be successful without the inner calling being perfected. Our inner calling is to attain union with God, transmute our karma, use the violet flame, love one another, serve one another, embrace the great masters. The outer calling cannot be successful without the inner calling being perfected. Why? We must perfect the geometry of being until we become congruent with the original Adam, Kadmon, in the beginning. That perfect blueprint that is in our etheric body, covered over, is how we have distorted that blueprint. Roerich knew this. He said the inner calling must be perfected. For the outer calling is to demonstrate to the world the effects of what the inner light complete can be. You have nothing to give if you don't have the fire within you to give. You have nothing to build upon. The outer calling is to demonstrate to the world the effects of what the inner light complete can be. Not partial, not a little dab of light here and a little dab of light there. Light complete. Light complete. Definition of the means of your ascension. Describing his own calling, the Ascended Master Nicholas Roerich said, his paintings were inspired by the great adepts to liberate the soul and to draw the soul into realms beyond the physical. This art has truly been my offering, not only to spiritual disciples, but to all those who cannot take the specific teaching, for it is too strong for them. You want the undiluted teaching, you want the elixir of the teaching, you want the absolute essence, boiled down, taken down like the alchemists. That's what you need to have your victory. This art has truly been my offering not only to spiritual disciples, but to all those who cannot take the specific teaching, for it is too strong for them. Yet in gazing upon my art, they may assimilate the truth embodied in the heart of the artist. He told us that we can do the same thing no matter what our field of work. He said, whatever your service, God can work through you to transport others to spiritual realms. May your very presence do this for those whom you meet. May many look upon you and see there an open door, a window's view into heaven. In order to fulfill the mission that is ours, and ours alone to fulfill, the Ascended Master Nicholas Roerich gave this advice. Remove yourself from the doodads of the world, from an encumbrance of things. Know the beauty of space and of emptiness, so that you might fill it with a Master's light. Insulate yourselves from negative media and the constant sounds and images of television that are so damaging to the finer bodies. Force the world to be silent in your home, in your abode where you commune with God. Shut it out except when something important is to be let in. It is a world of noise. This noise affects the heart and the heart's attunement with the infinite. Seek the solace of quietude in nature and in the place you have prepared for your communion. For the hour of your communion, the shaft of light from the above to the below does manifest, and you begin to glow with light as you meditate and decree. And that glowing light becomes an electrode in the earth, and many souls receive strength, refinement, and nourishment from your effort. The Darjeeling Council recommended that Nicholas Roerich speak to our conclave this summer. Because he is a man of this century, we can identify with him. He is not a god or a superman. He is no different than we are, except perhaps in the levels of his determination. When I study this document from beginning to end, it simply reminds me how much we must strive to make it. God will not give us our ascension on a silver platter. Roll up your sleeves, go to work, go within your being, find that God, and promise yourself, before you leave this tent now, promise yourself that you will attain union with God in this life, and that you are willing to do anything, the spiritual work, the work that needs to be done around you. That is the mighty work of the ages when you endow it with your flame and God's. Thank you.